This is Chris Heasley with the Chris Heasley Radio Show. And on today's show, we are going to give a state of the Republican Party in Houston and in Harris County. But before we get into that, I want to address a recent interview, a radio interview done about a week ago here locally of two Texas state representatives. Texas State Representatives Gene Wu and Ron Reynolds were interviewed about a week ago on a local radio show. And I want to sort of go over their talking points and give some counterpoints. And just to give you an idea of who Ron Reynolds and Gene Wu are, they are your local Texas State Representatives. They are out of Fort Bend County, and they are Democrats. And they are fervent leftists. They are radicals, and they are dedicated to implementing a progressive agenda here locally in the state of Texas. And I'm going to go over their talking points, but this is just my interpretation. I want to make that clear. And I would ask the listening audience to call State Representatives Gene Wu and Ron Reynolds and ask them the specifics about the things I'm about to go over, to have them further clarify their points on these matters, to see if I got it right, and just to have them get their side of their opinion in the matter. But essentially, I think it is safe to say that Ron Reynolds and Gene Wu disagree with something called nationalism. And nationalism is a concept brought to us by President Donald Trump, which is essentially his idea of America first. The idea that a political leader should advocate on behalf of that person's own country before any other matter, before any other country. President Donald Trump believes that the American president should be advocating on behalf of the American people and their interests. This is called America First, and this is what nationalism is. And this is something that I would say is safe to say Gene Wu and Ron Reynolds, that they disagree with, because they spent a good hour sort of critiquing, or I would say even attacking, the idea of nationalism, the idea of America first. And what they do is they attach to it a sort of a tribalistic or a nativist type of image to anyone who espouses ideas of nationalism. So in typical Democrat fashion, they pull out the race card. And if you today decide to start considering moving to the right, considering the America First agenda, considering a nationalist agenda, all of the names will be applied to you. Racism, bigotry, xenophobic, all of it's going to be put at you by the political left, by Gene Wu and Ron Reynolds, should you reconsider this. They do this while at a time they acknowledge that a good percentage of the minority community in Texas is moving to the right. They're moving to the nationalist agenda. They're considering it. They're liking it. They're moving to the America First agenda. This is happening. And Ron Reynolds and Gene Wu acknowledge this, and they even state specifically that Black Americans are moving to the right and that Indian Americans are moving to the right. And I want to read to you just a quote, just to make sure I'm getting this right, because I'm not sure if you saw the interview, but I did. I sat through it. And I want to just read you a couple of quotes from the interview. This is specifically from the interview, and this is State Rep Gene Wu giving his critique on nationalism. And here it is, quote, "I know that there has been a strong push within the Southeast Asian community, especially the Indian community, that has been moving rightward because of things back in India, because of Modi. And then he goes on to say, there's a lot of Indians moving rightward and moving towards Trump. And I think we need to talk very carefully about that. Be careful what you ask for." And that is Gene Wu, Texas State Representative from the 137th District and Democrat, expressing caution for minorities who consider to move to the right. Ron Reynolds doubles down on the point. Ron Reynolds, quote, "You've seen a number of African Americans that have moved to Trump, and I want to say the same thing about the African American community. You will vote against your own interest if you believe that Trump is going to do anything to help the African American community," unquote. That is Ron Reynolds, Texas State Representative, 27th District of the Democrat Party, expressing caution for those who consider moving to the American right, the America First, the nationalist agenda. And they're absolutely right. There is a considerable population that is moving to the right, that is reconsidering their lifelong opinions, their foundations, and considering this new novel idea introduced to us, the America First idea. A lot of people are going there. And it's not just in the minority community, it's not just in the American community, it is happening across the globe. And just to give you a couple of ideas, in Argentina, they recently elected for the first time ever their first nationalist president. His name is President Javier Milei. And he is wildly popular across the South American continent because he is for Argentinians first. And next door to Argentina is Brazil. And Brazil recently had a president, Jair Bolsonaro. And Jair Bolsonaro is a strong nationalist, always advocating for the Brazilians first. And he is wildly popular in Brazil. Brazilians love Jair Bolsonaro. Of course, in India, you have Prime Minister Modi implementing the nationalist agenda in India. Here at home, you have President Trump, who coined the term America First, which essentially describes nationalism at its roots. And then you have President Vladimir Putin, who is wildly popular amongst the Russian people because he is always advocating on their behalf. And so it is true. These people are moving to the right. This is a worldwide phenomenon. And I want to address why exactly this is happening, because it is none of the things that Gene Wu and Ron Reynolds say it is. It is none of those smearing tactics that they describe it as. It's none of that. What nationalism is, it's very easy and simple to understand. I will explain it in 4 quick bullet points. Number 1, it's secure borders. It is the idea is that your borders should be secure so that the innards of the country are protected. The people, the communities, the towns are all protected by an exterior border that is formidable. Secure borders is number 1. Number 2, a strong currency, a currency that is neither overprinted or underprinted. The two ways that economies are brought to their knees is through overprinting and underprinting the currency. Nationalists oppose that tactic. It is protecting local industry, which means that you advocate for fair trade practices and you only implement tariffs in response to unfair trading practices, only in response. And it is a strong military that is kept at home. That means that you have a strong military that only acts in defense, in response to foreign aggression, and is never the foreign aggressor. It is peace. That's what that idea means. And those are the ideas of nationalists, and that's why this idea is taking off around the world. And of course, there's the opposing idea, the ideology that goes up against nationalism, the ideology of the American left, the ideology of the Democrat Party today, which is the globalist ideology. An ideology that was not scripted by the people, but rather by the European billionaire class. The European billionaire class scripted this idea. And when they scripted it, they began their talking points that were brutally honest on what they intended to do to the people of the world. And the quote was by Klaus Schwab, "You will own nothing and you will be happy." That idea right there completely describes the globalist agenda being put on the people across the world, where the people across the world will be put in a state of peasantry by the billionaire class, a return to the days of the aristocracy of 400 years ago. That is what the globalist agenda is. And now I will go through those same four bullet points, where the nationalists argue for strong borders. Under the Biden administration, we have no borders. Our border is disintegrated. Our country is coming unraveled. Where nationalists, where the American First agenda is a strong currency, under the Biden administration, we have hyperinflation, where your dollars are becoming absolute water, where everything from a stick of gum to a gallon of gas is becoming so expensive that you can no longer afford it. Where under the Trump administration, we began seeing a resurgence of American industry. Under Biden, everything is manufactured in China and shipped across the ocean to your doorstep. Everything is manufactured overseas. And finally, again, Under President Trump, we had 4 years of peace. Worldwide peace never happened in our lifetimes. Whereas under the Democrat agenda, the globalist agenda, we have a constant pounding of the fist for more war with foreign adversaries. We have a constant clamoring for war with Russia. And these are the two ideologies: nationalism, America first, versus globalism. And this is the Chris Heasley Show. And on this show, we will bring you all of the ideas, the content, the information that you need to take back your towns, your communities, your cities. We advocate for local activism first. And on this show, it's a very simple, we give you all the information. There's just simply one to-do task item for you when this show is over. Call Gene Wu and call Ron Reynolds and ask them to clarify their points on the globalist position. And with that being said, we have two guests today. On the line, we have G2. G2, are you there?
I am.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you for calling in today. And we have also in our studio, we have Cindy Siegel, who is the chairperson of the Harris County Republican Party. She heads up the Republican Party for Houston and Harris County. And I want to thank you for coming today, Cindy.
I'm glad to be here.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad that you're in our studio today. So I gave a pretty robust analysis of what I believe to be the divisions between our two sets of ideology, the globalist left and the America First Republicans. And I'd like to ask, in Harris County, how do you see it? Do you see things being status quo, or do you see sort of some change in the air in Harris County with regard to local opinions?
Thanks, Chris. I do believe that things are changing. I think, there was a time probably 10, 20 years ago, the Republican Party was believed to be the party of just old white people sitting in a country club drinking martinis. And that's changed. And I think largely due to President Trump. I think he recognized that across the country that and I'm going to say average person, people like you and I that are just out there wanting a good life for their family, wanting to make a living, wanting to put a roof over their head and have the opportunities that maybe more opportunities for their kids than they actually had. And I think President Trump recognized that the average American felt like their country, their government, their national leaders had forgotten about them and left them behind and wasn't concerned about what was going on in their lives. And I think, you laid it out properly, the difference between a nationalism versus globalism. And most people just want to be able to live a good life that's safe and to be able to take care of their family and offer their kids a bright future.
So I think it's safe to say that today, in that interview with Gene Wu and Ron Reynolds, they are very concerned because they acknowledge that within the Republican Party, there was sort of a civil war within the Republican Party where you had the establishment element, which is the legacy people, the legacy group of the Republican Party, the George Bush element, the Karl Rove element, which is a complete opposite, a complete loggerhead with this new element, this America First element, the Trump element. And I think that what the Democrats in that interview see is, I think that they're more friendly with that older establishment, that older Bush element, and they see this new Trump element as being completely adverse to their globalist agenda. And there was sort of they acknowledged there was a reckoning between the two groups within the Republican Party, and one group won out, which is the Trump element. Can you give me a state of the internal opinions, the internal ideas within the Republican Party between those two ideologies? Is it more legacy, or is it more of the Trump America First?
I think it's changed to, President Trump controls the party today. There's still a faction that is what you call the legacy. But I think overall people recognize that what they see today in this country, what had always worked for decades, for quite frankly both parties, doesn't work today. That, we've allowed this to happen. And you look and see what's happened under President Biden, and you mentioned it, the no borders, the hyperinflation. People don't feel safe in their own homes and communities. You know, the defund the police movement that started during COVID. You know, people recognize that they're not going to be able to have that American dream under what's always been the status quo offered. And I personally believe that the Democrat Party today has taken, they want us to be asleep at the wheel. They want us to just be quiet, follow what's always worked, because they know that they have slowly changed sort of the framework of this country. And that's been their big push to move towards more of a globalist society.
Well, I think it's very funny in that interview with Ron Reynolds and Gene Wu, they are calling the Republican Party as you said, the old, cocktail sipping old gentleman's club, white man's club, and they're calling it that while acknowledging that there's this transition happening, while acknowledging that there's this huge minority group going into that direction, but yet they're still claiming that it's this old element. And what I'm trying to say is that in Fort Bend County, I think the Republican Party might be as much as 55% minority at this rate. How are they able to continue to lay this label on Republicans when, in fact, we are an incredibly diverse Republican Party today?
Well, I think, and I'm speaking from the National Party on down, I think and I've used this when I've talked to groups, I think our principles of government, I think our basic values about how we approach our lives, the government, what our country was founded on, I think that they're the right ones. But the Republicans have historically not been great in terms of communicating that message. And we've allowed the Democrat Party to grab the narrative. Now, they have a lot of tools in their toolkit that we don't have. You know, they have the national media. If you were some alien from outer space that came down and landed and you listened to a conservative radio station or TV station of what's going on in this country compared to CNN, for example, you would think you were talking about two different countries. And I think in part, they've had tools that we haven't had, but additionally, we've not been great in terms of communicating those values, communicating what we stand for. And I think that that's where, when President Trump came into office, a lot of people, I think you had the average American thinking, this is a guy who's going to fight for me, because, he's a New Yorker. And people get upset when he punches back at the media, but that's sort of the New York philosophy. If you punch me, I'm going to punch you harder. And I think they believe strongly, and they saw it for 4 years, that he's fighting for them. And for those people that when he ran in 2020, when he was running for re-election, I think there were people that bought into Biden's narrative that, well, they wish Trump would be a little nicer and be more of, a gentleman, not punching back. They bought into that narrative. And instead, what did Biden say? He said he was going to be the grown-up in the room, that he was going to really work towards, being a positive influence. I think people see that those were just words. And I believe locally as well as nationally, we get a lot of words from the Democrat Party. They're very good about offering up just, words about what they stand for, et cetera. But when push comes to shove, they just want you to not question what they're saying. And if you do question it, then they immediately, instead of having that dialogue that you talk about, where you actually can communicate what your stand is versus the other person, they just immediately try to shut down the conversation by saying you're a racist or a bigot, instead of having a discussion, and I know you'd mentioned that you had someone on and you were talking about school choice. They don't want to talk about really what school choice is.
I like to propose the idea. Can anyone name one policy that's being proposed by the American Democrat Party that is in the favor of the people? School choice. The Republicans wanted to put $8,000 in your bank account for you to spend at a school of your choice. Ron Reynolds and Gene Wu specifically attacked that on that interview last week. My point is the money was mine to begin with. The money is ours to begin with. Who is Ron Reynolds and Gene Wu to take this money away from us? War with Russia. If the Democrats today, any dollars that we have left in our pocket are being taken from us and sent to Russia to be spent on this bloody war, largely advocated for on behalf of the Democrat Party. And if they could send your kids, if they had the political opportunity to send your kids up against that million-man Russian infantry, they would do that too. And so you can just go down the issues. Our currency, we're in a hyperinflation situation right now. If you remember when President Trump was president, the Federal Reserve threatened to hyperinflate the economy. And he shook his finger at him. He said, go for it. I dare you to do it. And they didn't want to tangle with President Trump. Why? Because he fights back. So when people say, oh, he shouldn't fight back, that what they're really saying, they're trying to get him to stop fighting. That's really what they're trying to say. And I think it's really good to see some fight in the Republican Party today. Can you give me a state? Because here's sort of what I see in local Harris County Republicans. I've had some bigger analysis on this, but since 2008, what I saw was sort of a hapless Republican Party locally. I think people threw the towel in. They said Republicans aren't going to win. It's Democrat territory. They just moved on. Whereas in the past two elections, since President Trump sort of put some energy in the Republican Party, I've seen money, I've seen credible campaigns, and I've seen formidable candidates step up within the Republican Party. Are you seeing that? Do you have a similar opinion? How are you seeing it?
Yeah, I think, we've got some great candidates locally, and you can look at what we've done here in Harris County. If you want to bring it home, it's the idea you mentioned schools. I think a lot of parents during COVID, they had the opportunity probably for the first time where they really saw day in, day out what was going on in their kids' education. And you mentioned they want you to just be quiet and do what they say. I think that's what's been going on in our schools for quite a long time. And I get it. I'm a mother. My daughters are now out of school. They're in their 20s. But you never wanted to be that parent that always questions, the teacher and questions the administration. But I think beyond just learning the arithmetic, algebra, whatever, I think we saw that they were actually going beyond in these schools what their charge was, which is to educate our children on and giving them skills so that they can have a successful life. And as a result, what we've done for the last 3 years, we've actually recruited and supported conservative candidates who are, for the vast majority, are parents or have been parents of kids in schools who've said, I'm going to step up. I'm going to run for school board because enough's enough. I want to make sure my kids are getting the tools where they actually can compete in the world versus learning about stuff that really is not going to move the needle and give them that bright future.
So it's very interesting that you brought up schools because, goodness, we had quite a ruckus in Fort Bend County last week. Fort Bend School trustee David Hamilton led a campaign where essentially parents were discovering the most explicit, disgusting sexual books. I won't put it into any more words than that because I can't put it into words. It's beyond belief what we read. And David Hamilton discovered these materials in our books, and then he led an effort to expose it, which gained attention across Fort Bend County. And it culminated into parents and pastors and other activists confronting the school board because of David Hamilton's activism. They confronted the school board, and it turned into a ruckus. And essentially what happened is, of course, the Democrats, they attacked David Hamilton because he led an effort to create transparency in the school boards. And so, again, I'm going to add that to one more item. Name me one thing the Democrats are bringing that's good for our lives. War with Russia? No. Hyperinflation? No. The illicit books in our schools library? No. So I think we can keep going down the line. G2, I want to give you a chance to chime in. Do you have any opinions on any of the things that we've discussed so far?
Well, I think you guys have hit on some really important issues. One of them is the messaging issue, right? And what that means is, of course, the Democrats, with the cooperation of Hollywood and their corporate media allies, and all the organizations outside the party, nonprofits and others, that are working on their messaging and campaigning 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. They don't start campaigning just a couple of months before Election Day. They start the day after Election Day for the following year. So you've got this constant messaging machine driving their attack on families, this promotion of their magic words, right? Their three magic words that they use that really convert voters into non-thinking drones who do whatever Democrats tell them. And of course, those three words are abortion, they are gender, and climate change. And when they say those things, it seems like they've got such a huge percentage of Americans so programmed that they will vote against all their own interests and vote exactly how they are asked to vote. That, based on what I'm looking at, are about 35% of the population that's in that group. They'll vote for their own demise. It turns out, I think about 5% of the population are those opportunists who really just are in the politics game because they want to get paid. These are the Bidens, who get elected president with 4 houses he couldn't possibly have afforded, but the media covers that up for him, so he's able to become vice president, despite a lifetime of corruption. About 5% seem to be these opportunists. They're just for sale. They're political mercenaries. And that leaves us about 60% of the population of this country that are, I think, extraordinarily unified around issues like education and prosperity and freedom and limiting government and, putting it back in the cage the Constitution was designed to be. And on the Republican side, on the conservative side, on the patriot side, there just simply isn't the capability to develop and deliver messages that are as compelling, even though the story, the ideology that a conservative, a constitutionalist, that they have is a far more compelling ideology. It's a far more compelling message. So I think there's a built-in disadvantage there. And what I see is that when a candidate comes out and takes a stand on issues, often, first of all, the candidates are terrified to do that. They're terrified at the local, state, and national level. And second, when they do that, they don't have the same level of support that a leftist candidate or a globalist candidate would have from corporate media. So I think one of the big challenges for the Republican Party and for all the candidates that stand on that pro-American side is getting messaging out. The Donald Trump point you made is a very good one. We ought not still be talking about the odd caricature the media has created of Donald Trump, and instead we should talk about the actual Donald Trump, the guy that implemented policies that for the first time in 30 years created a net income increase for the average worker, actually shifted the balance of power away from China and back to the United States. These were momentous achievements. But we don't talk about that. We talk about this bizarre character the media has created. I wonder, how do you think we get around this in 2024 so that we overcome that incredible messaging machine with something credible and effective on the pro-American side?
Well, very good points. I'm not going to say I have all the answers, but I'll tell you what we've tried to do. And I think the last 3 years we've seen that we've started to have some success in using the school boards as an example, or even the city of Houston election back in the fall. We were able to help conservative Republican candidates get elected to the city of Houston race, or city council for the first time in many years. And the diversity of the party, I think it's a perfect example Willie Davis, he's a black pastor. He won, and he dealt, he's been talking for many years, both from his pulpit and at City of Houston council meetings. He's been talking about crime and what was going on in our community. So he dealt with and spoke about local issues. And I think as we are in the presidential election year, it's going to be important to, in order to communicate with the average, or, what I consider the average voter, and I consider myself probably an average voter, although I probably have more knowledge because of the last 3 years than some, but to communicate and talk about what it means to people personally. So I think a great example that has resonated with people has been something that Governor Abbott has done. You mentioned the borders earlier. When he all of a sudden last summer started transporting people that were crossing into these small towns on our border, that could, and just overwhelming them with hundreds of thousands, millions of people entering in the country illegally, he started busing them to these sanctuary cities. And now all of a sudden, they can't sit there and ignore it and think, well, that's just their problem. You've got New York, you've got, Chicago, all of them from D.C. And that's been a very effective way of communicating more, actions speak louder than words, but communicating what's going on. So for the small town on the border or the rancher on the border that has illegals, cutting down their fences, crossing over, stealing, whatever, the burden it's placed, now it's become Chicago's problem, New York's problem. And people that were able to stick their head in the sand because it wasn't their problem, it's now become a local problem for it. So I use that as an example because I think talking and communicating in a way that connects the dots, that shows how Biden's policies are affecting each of us locally, from, the defund the police. I mean, see where we are in 4 years now, the arrest. Our police are being shot. There's not the respect for the police. And if they do charge someone with a crime, like those people, they just announced it yesterday or this morning that the judge let the people that attacked the security on the border when they cut the fence, they let him go. And I think that's what we're trying to do here in Harris County with the Republican Party, is talk about people's lives locally. It's easy to say, well, D.C., what's going on there? Other than filing your tax return every year, how often do you really stay up on what they're doing? Even Austin to a degree. And that's where I think talking about and connecting the dots about what does this mean to your life? Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?
One of the things that I regularly advocate for on this show is it seems as if at the national level they're insulated, right? The Biden administration is hugely unpopular. The American populace rejects it, yet he moves forward with this agenda, whereas your local politicians are within a mile's reach of you, and they are completely untouched. Nobody talks to them, nobody calls them, and the minute that activism starts happening at the local level, things begin to change. And I think it's important that you don't just call Republicans, you call Democrats too. Even when you know they're going to oppose your opinions, you still call them and let them know your opinions. And personally, it seems to me as if the minute you start doing that, it almost immediately, maybe I have a slight difference of opinion with you, because it seems like the state level response, the minute we start going local with our activism, we almost see a corresponding response at the state level almost immediately, but that federal level is just a Goliath that's out of our reach.
No, I would agree. I think the state, the closer you are locally, to us at home, the more responsive they are. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I think a lot about our local Republicans that are elected to state office. I think that they've carried a lot of great bills. I've been frustrated because, particularly in the House, they've gone against the Democrats up there that, there should have been more conservative legislation passed. But you're right, Chris. I mean, there's nothing like someone being active and speaking up. They want you to be a sheep. They want you to just do whatever they say. And, I had mentioned to you years ago, I was mayor of the city of Bel Air. And I can tell you, you pay a lot more attention when you're sitting up at the council table and you're looking at a packed city council chamber and people are out in the lobby and you've got a bunch of angry, upset people. You're more likely to listen and do the right thing when people are speaking up.
Absolutely. I would like to get an assessment of, within Harris County, within Houston, I would like to get an assessment of the different levels of government. So if we could first talk about city council. Do we have Republicans on the city council? What is the count? When is the next election coming? How are we looking?
So, City of Houston, now there are other small cities, as you know, that have their own city councils, and there's two elections every year. There's elections in May. Some cities have their elections, like Westview does theirs in May. Bel Air does ours off-season, the midterms in November. But City of Houston they had changed their term limits, and they had an election where we got a new mayor. There were several people who were up for office, and we were able to help. Mary Ann Huffman got reelected. We've got Fred Flickinger who took Dave. I'm blanking on his last name. Who was a Republican up in the Kingwood area. We've got Amy Peck, and now we've got Julian Ramirez, Twyla Carter, and Willie Davis. I mean, again, I mentioned when you talk about the Republican parties changing, Julian Ramirez was a DA. He, first Hispanic to be elected to the city of Houston, a Republican since Orlando Sanchez. Willie Davis is the first Republican black city council member to be elected since Reconstruction. So that in itself says things are changing. People are opening up their eyes and listening. So those races come up. It seems like at times there's always a city council, but you have your school boards, you have your city councils, you have your med districts, the appraisal board, the state legislature. Now we're going to have, instead of it being appointed, there's going to be 3 people that will be elected in this upcoming election in May to represent the taxpayers. So, they say all politics are local. I think to a large degree, that this is all of these various governmental entities, they impact your daily life. Does your trash get picked up? Are you safe? Are your kids getting a great education? When you turn on your water, are you getting safe water? And that's why it is a great way, and you can make a difference by being an activist, going to city council meetings, going to the school board meetings. The squeaky wheel does get attention.
Absolutely. I'm not sure if you heard that, G2, but she said that we have our first black city councilman since Reconstruction era elected for the Republican Party in Harris County in Houston. And, I think that's evidence of a trend that's going across the country, where people are reconsidering their foundations and reconsidering this new set of ideas being brought to us by this new Republican Party. G2, can you comment on that?
Well, I think it's clear. If you look back at that New York Times Siena poll that was done 6 or 8 weeks ago, where they showed support for Donald Trump amongst the Black American community going from around 12%, which was already extraordinarily high in 2020, to now about 22%, a significant increase, potentially doubling as this trend continues. It shows that these folks are stopping to say, wait a minute. Why have I been loyal to this one brand while I see my neighborhoods under assault with chemical weapons from the Chinese Communist Party? And, of course, I'm speaking of fentanyl. For those that don't know, that comes from the Chinese Communist Party to the cartels. The cartels make the fentanyl, ship it into the United States, and we lose about 100,000 Americans a year to that scourge. So I consider it a chemical weapon. So they're looking at this fentanyl in their neighborhoods. They're looking at the crime and the lack of order, and they're saying this isn't what we should have. Why do we keep supporting the same political folks? And then they look back and see the incredible impact that Donald Trump's policies had over those 36 months before what I call the beginning of the Fauci administration, when they released the virus. And they're just saying, listen, I just want more of that. I want a nation headed down that path, and it doesn't matter what race I'm from or what. It just matters that I want a nation that is safe and secure and prosperous and free. And so I think that message cuts across all racial and ethnic lines if it's communicated. So I think it's great to see more and more people joining the party, getting active in the Republican Party, who don't come from that historic country club kind of set. And by the way, it's not just folks that are not Caucasian. I know at least a handful of people who were Democrats 4 years ago, having gone through what you pointed out, that education about the education, they saw what was happening with their children during the lockdown, and they dropped the Democrat Party. They joined the Republican Party, and now their frustration is that the Republican Party doesn't fight hard enough for the things they believe in. So they're actually more conservative than the Republican Party on average. So and those folks are Caucasian. So it's really interesting to see what I consider about that 60% of America coming together. And if the Republican Party can simply serve them, in other words, not just talk about these things, but get into office and put them into effect. There's a school choice bill that went through the Tennessee Senate. I don't know what the current status is. Texas Senate, but it should be moving out of the Texas Senate into law. It is. And it's important that the party actually serve those folks, and that the Republicans who get elected do more than just voice support for important issues, fight for those issues, and not just get into office and turn into the same sort of swamp rat that most politicians become.
I want to shift subjects. Please go. Mm-hmm.
Do you think the Republican Party is gearing up to be more willing to fight the Democrats, the globalists, the leftists, and really fight for that sort of Constitution-based America?
Well, I am. So I can't speak for every Republican, but yeah, I mean, I've seen it in the change in the grassroots. I think people who love their country, care about it, who have any realm of experience, and I'm not talking political experience, but just life experience, look at it, at where we've gone in 3.5 years and how bad it's gotten. I think as a result that they look at that, and if we don't fight, and I am saying we as all of us, all the grassroots, then we're giving up. And that's been my message consistently for the last 3.5 years, has been that they want us, the other side wants us to give up. They want you to not vote. They want you to not run for office. They want you to just let them educate your kid however they want. They want you to just pay your tax bill with no question. And that's probably my biggest concern, is making sure that people are still, that they don't give up, that they just think it's done. We can't win in Harris County. Well, the reality is we've shown that we can win. it's not, and I've used this as an example, it's not that it's like a football game where one side wins and another side loses. This is a war, and it's taking, winning battles wherever you can win them, and keeping up that fight. And it's not just our electeds, it's us that are the grassroots, the voters, making sure that we hold our electeds, to their feet to the fire, that they don't become just a swamp person, that they remember who elected them and put them into office.
I think the other,
in your county, it's about 84% of your population are citizens, so that's your voter pool, right?
Right.
And within that population, about 43.6% or so, 2 million people or so, are Hispanic of one origin or another. They break them up into different categories, but generally Hispanic. And so that's a huge group. Now, the folks that I've spoken with who are Hispanic, who have come here legally, who are not members of, MS-13 or the cartels or the, whatnot, but people who really came here legitimately and are looking for a better future and are really embracing America. Those folks are staunch conservatives. And the question is, in that Harris County population of Hispanics, do you think that the party is connecting with those folks? And are they recognizing that what you're describing, that there's this sort of grassroots pro-American effort inside the party that's representing their interests? Is that connection happening?
Well, I hope it is. We actually hired a young man last summer, an Hispanic young man, who is our, quote, outreach director, and not just going into Hispanic communities. He's going into Asian communities, Black communities, any community that we haven't historically been seen as being a part of. The Democrat Party is very good about showing up for a photo op. Sheila Jackson Lee's the master of that, showing up and getting her picture taken and handing out water during the photo op and then leaving. We're making efforts to go into the community because you mentioned the Hispanic population. I've always believed that there should be a natural, it seems a no-brainer. It's a natural alignment. They're very family-oriented. They're very, they're conservative. A lot of them are pro-life. They just want to take care of their families. But I don't want to cut out any other group of that either.
Exactly. Because it's really about ideology, not ethnicity, right? And some of those folks that have come from countries that are dominated by cartels know what's coming as these cartels become stronger because the federal government is allowing them to control our border and establish more robust organizations in the country. They don't want to return to the life they had in Honduras or Mexico, where cartels drew taxes out of their income because, you go to work every day, they know you have a job, so they show up and ask for 10%. They don't want to be subject to that violence and that absolute chaos that comes with a system without legal structure. So I think there's a natural ideological alignment with the vast majority of those folks. Certainly, anybody that's down in southern Florida and talks to the Cubans knows where they stand. They are staunchly pro-Constitution, pro-American, pro-conservative, and actually very, very Republican. So I think that ideology is attractive, and it sounds great to hear that you are being proactive in pushing that message out so people understand what you stand for, because Sheila Jackson Lee is more than clear. She calls for violence, right? She stands for everything that destroys the neighborhoods her constituents live in, and as in absence of a competing message, that's all people think there is to choose from. So it sounds like you guys are doing great work down there.
I have a question real quick. How popular is Lena? I think it's Lena Hidalgo in Harris County. Is she vulnerable to an upset?
I think she is. Alexandra Miller came really close. And, there were a lot of election shenanigans where we had polling locations that were predominantly Republican polling locations that didn't have paper. So it's just, if you look, and I mean, we were watching the numbers, and I think that Alex had a really good shot, and it's questionable the impact of how they ran the election and running out of paper, et cetera, had on it. I believe two people have seen, her narrative, and this is the playbook of the Democrats. If you try to have a conversation and you're moving into an area that they don't have an argument, they don't have a sound argument, then that's when they'll throw out, well, you're a racist, or it's about abortion, or it's about January 6th. And, Lena actually, when Alexandra Mueller filed an election challenge, because of how the election was mismanaged by the Democrats here in Harris County, Lena was coming out saying it was because, all of a sudden she's drawing a parallel with January 6th. It had nothing to do with January 6th. It had to do with how the Democrats mismanaged the November 22 election, and actually all elections that year. So I think she's vulnerable. I think anyone who stays involved and watches what goes on recognizes that she doesn't, she doesn't have the life experiences, but she's just trotting out the same tired Democrat programs, like this guaranteed income that they were doing for X number of families. At some point, people, if you're not one of those families and you're out there working hard to make a living, put food on the table, you have to sit there and go, where's the fairness of that?
Right. Well, so in the 2020 election, there was a man by the name of Seth Keshel. He is former military intelligence, and he did a full assessment of elections across coast to coast. And he argued that Harris County, that if elections had been done properly, President Trump turned Harris County pink. I think that we cannot dismiss the fact that paper ran out in certain election sites that predominantly were Republican. Or, for example, an activist by the name of Jerry Monroe. He has recently passed. He's an activist from the African American community. He is a staunch freedom fighter. And he talked at length about him seeing the voter, you drive in by voting, like a drive-in voting situation where IDs were being passed forth, back and forth, and essentially he essentially said it was a complete fraudulent run operation. When he challenged the elections and people there, they had the Harris County Sheriff get in his face. And this is all in the Freedom Matters Action Group Rumble channel. You can see Jerry Monroe tell this story. So unfortunately, we're out of time. But I'm so sorry, because I feel like the next hour could be us talking about how these machines ran out of paper. And also, I wanted to talk about the school boards and so much more. But anyways, I can only take up so much time. It's tax season, so a lot of people got to get their taxes done. I want to thank you, Cindy. I want to thank you, G2. And this is the Chris Heasley Radio Show. We will be back here next week on Monday at 1 p.m. Thank you very much.